So first, diet. Now, how many people here saw the film Super Size Me? So hopefully you've at least heard of it. Very interesting documentary film where what this guy did is he used himself as a laboratory, and he for 1 month, I think it was a month, he only ate fast food. And whenever he would go to the counter, if the server would say, would you like me to supersize you? Or maybe it was, shall I supersize you? He would always say yes. Well, before he started, he saw a doctor for a routine physical, and then he sort of continued seeing the doctor throughout just to see how his health would change. And if I remember correctly, he didn't even make it the full month because he was on the verge of being hospitalized. It made him so sick. Well, that actually happened. When I was a first-year student at McGill University, I took an anthropology course called Food and Nutrition in Prehistoric Societies. Now, this was way before the paleo movement, but what actually happened to this group of people was the Inuit Eskimo people in northern Canada. Now, what makes them very interesting is they're one of the few cultures in the world that would routinely survive on one food. They would just eat seal blubber. I mean, that was like 90% of their diet was seal blubber. Now, seal blubber happens to be extremely nutritious, so they did just fine with one food only. But what happened was, then the oil companies moved in, they started building these pipelines, all these guys got jobs, and now instead of hunting seal and eating seal blubber, they had jobs and they had company stores from which they would buy food. Now, to them, it was normal to survive on one food. So in these company stores, so what they thought was, well, let's just pick the thing we really like and eat that. So let me hear some guesses what the one food was.
Chips.
Donuts, very close. Pizza, Twinkies. It was Twinkies. This is like the greatest thing. I mean, it just didn't even occur to them that this was not a good thing to only eat Twinkies. And it became so serious that Health Canada had to step in because all these people were dying suddenly. Like, all these diseases just spiked up among them. So, you know, the point is, the major food industries, and this is not going to come to you guys as news, but they don't have your best interest in mind. We were genetically designed to crave sugar and salt because in nature, those two substances occur so rarely. So anytime we have something with those substances, we gravitate to them. And guess what? That's what processed food is. So the number one thing with diet is let's just stay completely away from processed foods. The other thing is this concept of autophagy, and it's beyond the scope of this talk to talk about it, but autophagy is the concept that, you know, when we're talking about fluctuating between these two extremes, you know, building up and breaking down, because that's basically what metabolism is. Either we take food in, we're breaking down the constituents to its smallest parts, and then, on the flip side, we then build it back up to turn into our tissues. Well, if we're eating constantly, we don't allow time to build back up. So I think, you know, so first we've decided that we're just going to eat whole natural foods. But then there's all these camps about, you know, high protein versus high fat. I don't think any of that really matters that much. You know, every person will have their own diet that works for them. What is more important is the number of hours spent not eating. So I suggest just 1 or 2 or 3 meals a day. Don't eat between meals. Have your dinner early. Have your breakfast kind of on the late side, have at least 12 hours of no eating. Exercise. There was a great TV commercial years ago for one of the major sneaker companies, and it came out in the fall. So it was right around Halloween, and it was this, you know, this attractive woman walking through the woods at night. I'm not sure why she was walking through the woods at night, but she's strolling along, and all of a sudden, here comes the Texas Chainsaw Massacre guy. You know, he's got the mask, and he's got the chainsaw, and she starts running, and he starts running after her with the chainsaw, and she is just running, and he's behind her with the chainsaw, and then they close up on her face, and she's running even faster, and then he's starting to slow down, and then she's running some more, and then he just kind of, like that. Now, in our society, the likelihood of us being confronted by a saber-toothed tiger is pretty slim. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't be ready for it if it ever happens. Our bodies were designed to be active. They were not designed to be completely couch potatoes. So if we need exercise for our heart to pump efficiently. We need it for our blood vessels to work properly. We need it for our muscles to function properly. I mean, this is all stuff that has to happen. And if you want a purely sort of like goal, a strategic goal, we're probably not going to encounter a saber-toothed tiger, but there might come a time in your life where you have to physically exert yourself to protect yourself or someone else. Say you're at the beach and a little kid gets swept out by a wave and you need to go help them. Wouldn't it be awful if you're not physically fit enough to go help that little kid? So where I really see it is in MRIs. When I look at MRIs, the muscle of people who are physically fit is lean, like elk. But the muscle of people who are sedentary is marbled with fat, and these people are at much higher risk for pain conditions. Sleep. Now, clearly, if we're talking about the alternating, building up and breaking down, sleep is the ultimate thing. I mean, that's where we build up. Where bodybuilders lift weights, when they're lifting weights, they're breaking their muscles down, but when they're sleeping, that's when they build it back up. So I'd encourage everybody to sort of learn about the concepts of sleep hygiene, having all the lights off in your room. There's no lot of electromagnetic waves passing through your bedroom. You don't want to look at the computer late at night, that kind of thing. Now, having done all the right sleep hygiene stuff, some people still have difficulty sleeping. CBD is one of the best things to help with restful sleep. Most of the research that's been done, one of the areas that has the biggest body of scientific data for CBD is for sleep. Last, we have emotional balance. Now, this can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people. So, whenever we're thinking about our emotions, there's the part that is the physical part, which is how CBD works. I told you about how the endocannabinoid system is how we integrate experiences into our psyche and how we respond to outside stimulus. One of the things that is really amazing about the endocannabinoid system is even beyond this idea of, attaining homeostasis, it even affects your memories. And the way it does that is it actually suppresses negative memories. So if something intense happens, if your CBD function, if your endocannabinoid system is functioning properly, it actually helps you to forget negative experiences. The organ in the body that has the highest concentration of endocannabinoid receptors is the female uterus. And because think about it, like childbirth is the most painful, awful thing in the world, but then you have a baby out of it, right? So what the endocannabinoid system does is it helps women to forget how painful it was. Because otherwise they'd have a baby, they'd have one, and be like, I'm good, been there, done that, don't need to do that again. So, that's why we think it plays such an important role in forming our memories. But, with this whole idea of how we perceive the outside environment, one of the big things in pain medicine right now is this concept of catastrophizing. And catastrophizing is when you expect a negative outcome. And if you look in the realm of behavioral medicine, think of the ABC. So A is an activating event. Somebody says something to you, probably your husband or wife. And then you jump to the consequence, which is it pisses you off or it stresses you out or like something happens. You jump from something happens to a strong emotional reaction. So that's A and C. Well, in the middle is B, which is the belief. So what is the belief that causes that jump from the activating event to this consequence? And that's where every single one of us has a responsibility to examine our beliefs, You know, when I start saying, oh, she always does this and she always says that, well, I'm setting myself up for failure. Now, this is one of the really important things in pain medicine, but it's something that I learned rock climbing, of all things. For those of you who've heard me talk before, you know that before I went to naturopathic school, my life was evolved around rock climbing. It was my whole reason to exist. Now, in rock climbing, it's a beautiful pursuit because in order to get good at it, you have to learn the difference between rational fear and irrational fear. Rational fear keeps you alive. Rational fear you need in order to respect things that are real threats to your existence. Irrational fear prevents greatness. It prevents success. That's where you're scared of stuff that isn't actually a threat, but you think it is, so it keeps you frozen. In order to get good at rock climbing, you have to really understand the difference between things that actually are a threat, because you have to pay attention to them, and things that are not a threat, because you need to completely block them out of your mind. Now, Gary Young taught me two important lessons that I want to talk to you about now. The first lesson was this concept of rational fear versus irrational fear in business. I had treated Gary for years, and he still had this nagging midline pain, worse bending forward. Now, I had treated him with stem cells for years, and we helped him with a lot of his pain, but it was this one spot that I couldn't get better. Now, you guys know that Gary, when he was a young man, a tree fell on him and pretty much crushed his spine. And his seeking a cure for that, because he felt like conventional medicine really had nothing to offer him with his spine pain, that's what led him to go to France and then bring the essential oil movement to the United States. And it helped him a great deal, and it helped all of us. But he still had a lot of residual damage that caused him pain. So when he continued to have that midline pain, worse bending forward, I knew, like, he actually had damage to his intervertebral discs. And I said, Gary, what you need is you need stem cells actually injected into your disc. And he said, okay, when are we going to do it? And I said, no, Gary, you don't understand. I don't do that. Because you see, in order to do that, you have to have this big x-ray machine. And, I don't know how to do it. I don't have that. I'm not set up to do it. And he goes, well, what's it going to take? I said, Gary, look, first of all, you need this big machine. Then you need a clinic with a room big enough to house it. It has to be shielded with lead. And then you actually have to know how to use it. And then on top of that, I mean, that's just one problem. On top of that, I would be the first naturopathic doctor to do that. Do you know I would get so ridiculed? They will call me a quack. I mean, that'll really be storming the ivory tower. I mean, I'll get so much criticism for it. I looked at him, I realized he wasn't listening to me. And he looked at me and he said, they'll call you a quack? He goes, huh. Have you Googled the name Gary Young recently? And I just went, I felt so foolish. Like, here I was complaining to Gary about this stuff. And he looked at me and he said, what are you afraid of? And I realized he was right. And I went out and I learned how to use an x-ray machine. And I got a clinic big enough to house it. And he was one of the first people that I injected his intervertebral disc with stem cells. And he was exactly right. What that led to was my becoming one of the most experienced with the use of stem cells for the treatment of spine pain. I get invited all over the world to speak on its use at medical conferences. And I did get all those detractors who say all kinds of nasty things about me, but you know what? It didn't kill me.
Woo!
So this concept of rational fear versus irrational fear totally plays into the use of CBD, because here we have this fabulous substance that has the potential to disrupt the entire industry tremendously, but we can screw it up. Because, Young Living is the first major, big multi-level marketing company to introduce a CBD line. So they're taking a huge risk in doing this. So how do we not screw it up? because there's so much negative attention on it right now. Similar to stem cells, there's so much negative attention and disinformation and bias in it for the very reason that it has the potential to so massively disrupt the status quo. Well, the way that we don't mess things up is seed to seal. Seed to seal. Sourcing and science. Young Living's got that sussed out for you. Like, you don't have to worry so much about the sourcing and the science. Mike Bush, he's got that all covered for you. The standards, however, is somewhere around 50% the responsibility of Young Living and 50% the responsibility of every single person in this room. So what has to happen is everybody needs to responsibly and talk about these products. So when I'm done speaking, I'm going to bring up someone from training and education who's going to give you very specific guidelines about what you can and cannot say about CBD products, because I'm not really the person to talk to you about that. The second thing Gary taught me is the importance of giving back to the community. I mean, you know, Young Living, there's two things. There's the business that they do, which makes the world a better place. But then there's all the, every time you get one of the newsletters, you read on the front page, there's always the next initiative to make the world a better place. Because essential oils are great, but there's a lot of people who, first of all, can't afford essential oils, and they're like surviving, and that's like the last thing, they just are basically in survival mode. And Young Living has really taken the stance that it's our responsibility to help those people. And so where I've absorbed that into myself, how many people here heard me speak last year? So I spoke on this very stage, and for those of you who heard me speak, I made a pledge to you guys, and I just want to tell you about it and tell you where that stands. So I made a pledge that I would make stem cell therapy available to most and affordable to all. So, I'm sorry, the other way around. Make stem cell therapy affordable to most and available to all. And so the way I've done that is I brought on an associate who now provides stem cell medicine at a fraction of the cost. So that makes it available to most, affordable to most. And then, but that doesn't make it available to all. Now, in order to do it available to all, I've instituted a tithing model, which means 1 day per month, I provide stem cell medicine at no charge for the medically underserved. So these are people who can demonstrate that they're living below poverty level. So this is for people who are able to demonstrate that they're living below poverty level, and then there's two pathways to treatment. One is if they're a combat veteran, because if they've served in combat for this country, you're good. Like, that's all. The second pathway for people who are not combat veterans is I will do it in exchange for documentation of community service hours. So 60 hours of documentation of community service hours will purchase a stem cell treatment for the medically underserved. So if you would like more information on this, text me, and also if you just want to kind of stay in touch with me and so we can let you know what's happening with our clinic, text the word stem cells, one word, no space, stem cells, without a space between, and text it to 72345. So go ahead and take out your phone. Stem cells, no space, to 72345. So last thing I'd like to say is I'd just like to thank Mary Young for being such a friend to me over the years. So much of my success with my clinic is thanks to her, the support I got from her and from Gary. Thanks to the Young Living Essential Oil community. You guys have been a big part of my patient base over the years, and I just love working with you. And thank you to my wife, Indira, and my children who make it all worthwhile. So thank you very much. I hope to see you guys next year.